coming to you from Orange County, California. This is the JuggLife podcast with Max Ada and Chad Wesley Smith.
Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here. Welcome to another episode of the JuggLife podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, the notorious MAX, Max Montana. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you guys doing?
We are joined here at D-Town CrossFit in Dallas, Texas. That's what I like.
Okay.
By just a wonderful looking group of people, just been working hard at a Snatch clinic. Now we're going to talk a little bit about training for the Snatch, developing technique, and answer some questions. So today's episode is brought to you by Poppin' Pecs in the Dallas Metroplex.
Whoa.
I said it again, it's kind of the same deal. Let's go. They strike me like a bolt of lightning.
That probably came to me about seven seconds ago.
It's a lifestyle. Thinking of fake lifestyle brands is my lifestyle. That's how I live it. So I'll let Max take it away from here.
So when we're talking about, the general idea here is we're going to talk about developing technique and assessing where you are as a lifter and what stage you're in dictates what you should do in training for your technique. So a lot of times people talk about, this guy's a beginner or I'm advanced or I'm intermediate. And those terms are kind of arbitrary. They're just given out basically, maybe by how long you've been lifting or how strong you are. The way I like to look at technique and the way that makes the most sense for qualifying people into categories such as beginner, intermediate, advanced is what their technique does when we apply stress to it. So starting from the beginning, the definition of a beginner is that their technical execution of the lift can be different every single time they do the lift. So let's say you're snatching your 35 kilos, you do 10 singles there. Every one of those 10 snatches may have been different, may have had a different error occur each time. Maybe you missed it in front on 3 of them, maybe you missed it in back on 2 of them, maybe you pressed it out on 2 of them. So you have inconsistent, unsolidified technique. It's different every single time you do it. The definition of an intermediate lifter is that your technique is now solidified to the point that you have one mistake, maybe 2, but basically one primary error, and that error is generally caused by some kind of muscular weaknesses, okay? So now you've got a lifter not snatching 35 kilos anymore, maybe they're snatching 75 or 100 kilos, and they do 10 sets. All the misses in those 10 sets, let's say they miss 4 times, all 4 of them are missing out front, or all 4 of them are missing with a press out. Doesn't mean that as an intermediate you can't have a mistake that occurs kind of randomly, like, oh, I pressed out that snatch, or I dumped it behind, or I ran forward. But every single time, you're going to have basically the same error occur. The definition of an advanced athlete is someone whose technique remains solidified despite not training it. They have a really high resistance to technical degradation. So a great example of this is something Chad talked about earlier, where when I hadn't snatched for 4 years, I came back, not that my technique was great, but I came back and my technique was the same as it was 4 years earlier. A better example would be, let's say we watch someone like Ilya Ilin, right? Top level weightlifter, takes a year off from training, basically doing almost nothing. He comes back and in an extremely short period of time, his technique is essentially where it was before, okay? So there's no loss in technical skills or no change in technical skills when they stop training. If you had a beginner who's snatching 35 kilos and they're missing all over the place and they stop training for 3 months, they come back, they may have lost everything they learned, right? An intermediate may come back to training after, or may take time off from training and come back, and they may have developed a new issue because they haven't solidified technique. Maybe they used to miss out front, but they stopped training for 3 months, now they come back, now they're struggling to get in the right position, they're missing behind, they're missing forward, they're pressing out. Make sense? So each one of these individual groups, each one of these levels has different demands for the training of technique and different demands for the training around technique in order to develop properly and from a long-term perspective. For the beginner group, the primary objective of your training, especially for technique, should be to learn and solidify the technique, the right way. So your goal is to come in, your workout should be designed in a way to continually reinforce the right technique every time you train. So you're coming in, you're doing exercises and drills that teach you the components of the lift in their pieces, like we did today where we did like muscle snatch and drop snatch. We're learning parts of it and as a whole. So doing full snatches, full clean and jerks, because that allows you to practice both the areas you need to work on, the areas that you maybe don't understand as well, and the entirety of the technique all at once, so you can solidify that and move from beginner to intermediate. The demands of your training outside of technique for a beginner are going to revolve around, like your strength training kind of stuff, that's going to revolve around only training enough to develop the general qualities. So you need to develop explosiveness, some general strength, flexibility, mobility. All these things should support learning the technique. They should never take precedence over developing the technique. We don't want to have a beginner come in, despite what age they start at, and start hammering them with really, really hard squat and deadlift and pressing workouts, because that can hinder their ability to perform the lifts properly, right? How many of you guys have ever seen someone come in who's super, super strong and you're like, oh, that guy's gonna be, or girl is gonna be really good at the lifts, and then find out that it's like the hardest thing in the world to teach them, right? Pretty common, because getting really strong or doing a lot of training to become really, really strong can really impact your ability to develop that skill. The other side of that, or the next thing that's also extremely important and what your strength training around that should develop is you want to include exercises that develop the muscles that wouldn't otherwise be strong from doing the lifts, and the muscles that would potentially get injured if you didn't strengthen them. So when someone comes in as a beginner in weightlifting, it's really important that we strengthen the muscles of their shoulders, their wrists, their low back to some degree, because we want to ensure that those muscles which are, at a little higher risk for getting hurt without good technique, get hurt without good technique so that they don't get hurt. Does that make sense to everybody? So your focus for beginners is on establishing good technical skills, learning the lifts correctly and the ideal technique, practicing the actual lift itself and perfecting the skill itself. The strength training exercises and the development around that are to, one, just develop general qualities, and then two, protect from injury, develop any kind of muscles that could potentially get hurt from not actually training them.
And we got to talk on Thursday night with Tim Swords, who's the coach of Team Houston and coaches Sarah Robles, and is likely the most successful current American weightlifting coach in terms of putting the most people onto international teams. And he's doing that at the youth, junior, and senior level, developing lifters from, when we showed up to his house, they're training out of his two-car garage, had about a dozen kids there training from 10, 12 years old up to 24, 25 years old. And he said that there'll be 9-year-olds training next to Sarah Robles. And these kids, who just start lifting with them, whether they're 9, 10, 15, whenever it is that they start, when they are beginners, just in the same way that many, some people, everyone in here seemed at least to be on the high beginner or intermediate side of things. But if you're coaching people, just like you will have beginners, even if they're 35 years old, he said every day, every training session, they were doing, some kind of side plank or suitcase deadlift. They were doing Z press, so sitting on the floor, overhead press. They were doing back raises or reverse hypers. What were the other ones they were doing every day?
They did some kind of jumping every day.
Yeah, some kind of jumping exercise every day, upright rows every day to prepare those muscles, all going to be critical to success in weightlifting, to prepare those exact muscle groups that Max was just talking about that maybe are exposed to a little bit more injury. And are they maxing out on them every day? No, they're just going through doing moderate training for them, which, because they're beginners, And because this is true for any beginner, they're not able to produce much stimulus. The weights are light. So even though it might be hard in the moment as they're doing it, they can go ahead and do it again the next day and do it again the next day and not risk becoming too fatigued or overtrained with that. So whether for you as a lifter or a coach, that's going to be something to think about. Beginner lifters need more frequent training because they can do and need more frequent training. They need frequent training on the technique, because if someone's only been training for 1 week for weightlifting and they only lifted on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, well then 4/7 of their weightlifting career was off. So their technique is going to have a hard time improving at that rate. And they're also not producing much fatigue, so they can train very frequently to maximize the effect of things.
Right. For the intermediate group, the main goal is to establish what that weakness is, those muscular weaknesses that prevent them from executing the lift properly, or the technical skills that maybe they don't have currently or have not developed sufficiently, and eliminate them. So your training revolves around finding what that weakness is. For example, let's say somebody has an error in the explosion phase of the pull, right? Or maybe they have an error in the start position, the initial pull off the ground. You can then start implementing more training directed at that particular area and focus on that as a key and primary aspect of your training program. They need to address it from two different perspectives. Where the beginners address things primarily by practicing the skill, intermediates now start to incorporate much more significant heavier weights and strength training developed at improving those muscular weaknesses. So like we had, for example, if somebody who has some kind of issue off the ground, maybe they would incorporate an exercise like a snatch pull to the knee. And they would use pretty significant weights, as much as they snatch, if not more, and some significant training volume, because they want to develop muscular hypertrophy, they want to develop strength there, and they want to develop the skill. In addition to fixing weaknesses, intermediate lifters now have the struggle or the situation of maximizing their body weight class and trying to develop to the highest level they can as an athlete. So they're trying to move to being advanced. In that process, they're gonna start to incorporate a lot more training geared around the accessory and auxiliary exercises to build up more general strength, more explosiveness, but also some hypertrophy to maximize their body weight class. Their training is going to be a little bit harder, a little bit heavier, because they should be stronger by now than they were as a beginner. So their training has to change a little bit to where the frequency is similar to a beginner, but not nearly as frequent. You can't, if you snatch 35 kilos, you can do it every single day and practice your skill. If you snatch 135 kilos, you're probably not going to have great results doing that every single day. So they have larger workouts with slightly more time rest between them and slightly lighter loads in those sessions. So the whole training starts to take a different shape. As they move to advanced, the main quality of advanced lifters is the maximization of what you have and the highest achievement in sports. So intermediates and beginners, their goals are not necessarily directed at performance on the platform, right? Beginner, the goal is train for the sake of training and enjoying it and for the sake of learning technique. Intermediate is developing the weaknesses and training for the sake of improving your results. Advanced lifters now, because they've gone through this process, they should have maximized their body weight class, so they have enough muscle on their body to fill out the class they belong in. Their strength levels should be significantly high enough because they've done a lot of training for this as an intermediate, and they should have excellent technical skills because they've spent the last 2 periods of time developing those skills. So now the goal is to maximize their ability to compete on the platform and win meets, but to perform at the highest level of skill there. So advanced lifters are going to fall into a category that's a little different because every single advanced lifter may have gotten there from different places. They may have gotten there in a different way in the sense that maybe they, some people might need a lot more strength work, some people might need a little bit less, just based on the fact that as you get to that point, going through each phase before that may have been, you may have neglected some things or not sufficiently practiced stuff. Their training is going to look a lot more geared towards heavier weights in the snatch and clean and jerk, because as your technique becomes more and more solidified, you can tolerate more and more training on it without the fatigue decaying the quality of movement. As they get, advanced also need to spend more time with heavy weights in the strength exercises, because their main goal there is not necessarily to build new strength, but to maintain the strength they have and develop any kind of, and use that strength training as a way to augment the performance of really, really heavy lifts. So they're not going to do as many large, voluminous, huge squat workouts, because that's really fatiguing and will deteriorate the quality of their snatch and clean jerk workouts. They will do more high intensity, above 85 or 90% squats, as a way to maintain strength, keeping a strength stimulus there, and in doing that, it doesn't fatigue them so much for the practice of the actual snatch and clean and jerk. So as you go from period to period to period, from beginner to intermediate advanced, your training goes from really broad, really general, skill-based, learning-based training to much more developmental, fixing weaknesses, establishing balance, and maximizing the performance of the lifts through training and through practice, to maximizing your performance in a competition by developing and training the most important, most specific aspects of the technique and of weightlifting.
All right, so questions about anything, snatch related, anything Max just talked about, really any training questions. Our number one goal today is you feel like you leave here with your questions answered. Not that Max and I necessarily have every answer, but we likely know someone who does. And those will mostly be rehab, mobility type of questions, which I'll direct you now to Dr. Quinn Hennock at Clinical Athlete, or non-bulking nutrition questions. The bulking ones I can answer for you, but non-bulking nutrition questions, which go see our friends at Renaissance Periodization for that. So questions?
Yeah. I juggle with which order I should come back over. My powerlifting, my squats. Should I be doing my technique first, my snatch and clean, or should I'm struggling with that because I don't want to fatigue myself, like you said. I do want to gain my technique on my squats, before my snatch and clean. So should I do the technique first, or should I change my percentages as far as which one I'm doing first?
So the question is about exercise order, if it should be, lifts, snatch and clean and jerk, and then squats, or vice versa. So,
I mean, if you're trying to build your squat up, then and the Olympic lifts are severely impacting that, it may be that you're doing something wrong in the Olympic lifts, because I wouldn't think that snatch and clean and jerk are so demanding that they take away from the performance of the squats. What I would suggest is you're always going to need to practice the skill. So your training should always revolve around perfecting your skill. No matter what level you are, you always need to have some level of practice there. So I would suggest doing snatch and clean and jerk always, pretty much always before squatting. The only reason I would squat first is if, somebody is so deficient in leg strength that squatting first is going to give them more on their total than doing the Olympic lifts would be. And in most people's cases, it's, I don't even have athletes in that category yet where they would need to do squatting prior to the Olympic lifts. The thing is, squatting really hard is going to affect your technique much more severely than snatch and clean and jerk will affect, the fatigue from those will affect your squats. Does that make sense?
Other questions?
So, in terms of the principle of fatigue and stuff, I just find it's hard to really distinguish with my athletes, how much fatigue is enough, right? I'm just wondering, there's some common signs that you're starting to push the athlete a little bit too hard, or what you guys are generally looking for in the athletes in terms of fatigue.
Yeah, so the question is regarding fatigue management and sort of monitoring your athletes and assessing them there. First off, watch scientific principles, the strength training scientific principles, the weightlifting videos on fatigue management. So what we're looking at is really there's three levels of fatigue. There's regular training at or below your maximum recoverable volume, which is as much training as you can effectively recover from in a given time period. We have overreaching, which could be functional, which is planned, or non-functional, unplanned, and then overtraining. All right. For overtraining, powerlifting and weightlifting, if you're just doing that, you have to be really bad at program design and really tough to truly get overtrained. CrossFit, much more likely that can happen because there's so many more variables to manage. It's likely that you could get 2 or 3 things all getting into high volume at the same time, and that just really hits you. So we're really looking at the training at or below maximum recoverable volume and overreaching. So, you know, we can establish some parameters, and you can watch Max's video, Scientific Principles of Weightlifting on Overload. Talk about some kind of known parameters for, you know, suggestions of amounts of sets and reps at given intensities to do. But the first thing you need to do in terms of monitoring your athletes is talk to them. You know, is establish a effective communication in the coach-athlete relationship. That it's easy to ask someone, oh, how you doing today, when they walk in, and it's like, oh, fine, coach. And they say fine, and it's fine if they feel great, and it's fine if they feel shitty, and fine for everything in between. But to push a little bit more on that, and to make your expectations of them known, that they communicate to you, you know, honestly and effectively about how they feel coming into a training session. If they feel bad, to be able to begin to identify why that could be happening. You know, in different recovery stuff, starting with nutrition and sleep, if they're not doing a good job there, to get that sorted out. If they need to add some other passive recovery modalities on top of that, you know, soft tissue therapy, light workouts, everyone's favorite, compassionate touching. It's science. It's science. And start taking care of those things. Now, what we really need to establish, though, is what does it mean to be recovered? So recovery is just a return to baseline. If today you did, you know, 100 kilos for 3 sets of 5 in the squat, it would be a reasonable expectation, you know, in 3 to 4 days that you could repeat that same effort. You could do 100 for 3 by 5 again. If it was 100 for 5, 4, 2, that would indicate that you're not recovered. Now, in the big picture of training, that could mean that you were, if 100 for 3 by 5 was like a PR, all right, maybe you're overreached and you need a deload week, or you just need to adjust your frequency or to modulate your workouts a little bit, having like a bigger workout earlier in the week to a smaller workout later in the week. You know, in regards to other monitoring stuff for fatigue, things like HRV, you know, which is a tool that I think a lot of people use, or like a more advanced thing like an Omega Wave, which our buddy Scott back there is probably the only one who might have a chance at having access to that. But Scott is the director of speed and power for Texas Tech football. So I don't know if there's any Red Raiders here. Guns up? No? Okay. You know, a tool like HRV is something that's popular for a lot of people, but it's important to keep in mind that HRV is what would be known as a lagging indicator of fatigue. So it's going to, you know, when it gives you the red, yellow, or green, when it shows you red, you've already been fucked. Like it's behind on it. What it is very useful for is in a group setting. Like if you had an entire, you know, CrossFit competitive team, something, and you were tracking 6, 10 plus people, and they were all using HRV, it would be able to show you trends to see, okay, we did this training and it affected the group's HRV on like this on average. So I know the next time I'm planning training similar to that, I should expect this. But it's really going to be, you know, about communicating with the athlete. You know, maybe starting to have them journal, writing down how many hours they slept. You know, tracking calories and macros and all that stuff, just so you can begin to eliminate the variables of that. Or when they do start to feel bad or aren't recovering as well from training, you can identify quicker why that's happening. All right. Other questions?
That's it? There you go.
I was going to say, trying to identify the strength needs of an athlete versus like their leg strength or their back strength. Is there a relationship between those two? Between like the deadlift and the squat that you're looking for, or is it simple as I can pull and catch but not stand up with the weight? I'm not even able to pull it up, even though I'm able to front squat for rest or something like that.
So in terms of, so the question is in terms of like strength ratios between different exercises for the Olympic lifts. Yeah. So there is data that shows ratios, and the data was collected in the Soviet Union back in a time when there was no women lifting, and the population that data was collected from were maybe dabbling in things they probably shouldn't have been. So understand some of that is probably going to be
Soviet sports supplement.
Yeah, is going to be a little bit skewed, but more important than getting tied to a certain number on that stuff, like, oh, I squat 134% of my clean, that means I should not do this much, clean and jerk, or I should do more squatting. I wouldn't get fixated on that, but I would look at what breaks down, and if there's any area that is significantly weaker than other areas, then address that. It's pretty common sense to look and say, oh, I can't stand up with a clean, and my front squat is 3 kilos over my best clean and jerk. Yeah, your legs got to get stronger, right? Aside from that, those muscular imbalances, those muscular weaknesses, you also have to analyze technique and make sure it's not that, well, I squat, 50 kilos more or 50% more than I clean, but my clean looks like, trash. Then, you got to work on the technique. As you solidify and get from beginner to intermediate and you start moving beyond that, then those ratios probably have a bigger impact, but it's going to be individual to you, right? Make sure that the ratio is something you track over time and say, yeah, generally when I squat about 30% more than I clean and jerk, I'm able to make progress in the clean and jerk. I wouldn't just grab them out of nowhere and apply them to yourself, especially when you don't have solidified skill. Make sense?
Yeah, another question?
Yeah. In terms of weightlifters, just kind of curious if you've ever noticed a trend towards a common set of vaults for different body types.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, you want me? I'm just kidding. Yes. So yeah, it's going to break down into a couple different groups, right? There's people that are built real tall, short torsos, long limbs. They're generally going to be better at pulling. Well, let me start over. There's a couple different types of lifters out there. You'll see them. People that can snatch really, really well, and they can't clean and jerk at all, either lift. People that can snatch really well and clean really well, but they can't jerk very well, right? And they're generally super strong. And then there's people that can't snatch to save their life. They're not great at snatching, but they're really good at clean and jerks. Right? And then the last one is somebody who's maybe they're good, not good at snatching, maybe they're terrible at the clean, they probably are, but they're incredibly good at the jerk, right? So there's always like these several categories people fall into. They're definitely broken up into body types. People that have long torsos and short legs and shorter arms, generally going to be better at clean and jerks, right? Short little arms, and a long torso, not the best for snatching. So you're going to see people struggle in that. And the technical faults manifest themselves the same way, right? When you have really, really strong legs and a really short legs and a long back, your back's gonna generally be weaker than your legs, so you're gonna shift yourself behind the bar early and kick it forward or miss out in front. You got a really short torso and long legs, you're probably gonna be great at pulling the bar, right? But recovering from the deep squat in a clean or from a snatch, gonna be a big struggle. Long arms, short body, going to be a lot harder to jerk the weight than it is if you've got, if you can't even reach the bottom of your pockets with your hands. So understand there's definitely those things that carry over. There's a lot of variations, but your body type is going to dictate where your faults occur, right? And the goal is to always eliminate those weaknesses by, you look at yourself right away in the mirror and you're like, oh shit, my legs are fucking short. I better start doing some more back work because I'm always going to struggle with back work. I'm always going to need a stronger back. Does it make sense?
Other questions? Yep.
As far as your position
Yeah, so the question is about the spinal position and bracing. So let's think of a soda can sitting on a table, empty can, and you try and crush the can. It takes some pretty good force. Take that exact same can, put a dent in the side of it. Smash right away. All right, that extension through the lumbar is the dent in the side of the can. So what we're looking to create is 360 degrees of pressure through a more neutral stacked position, really lining up the bottom of the ribs with the top of the pelvis, getting those, rather than being like this, getting them to face each other, and then taking your air, bringing it down and pushing out through your obliques to make as wide a waist, as big a base to support that weight as possible. You know, in the snatch and the clean and jerk as you set up there, it would be ideal if we can keep the lumbar spine more flat and the extension come from the thoracic spine. That's what's going to be your chest. Your chest goes up from the mid-back, not from, you know, losing that lumbar position. So Dr. Quinn Hennock, a lot of great information on that. Also watch our squat pillars video on breathing and bracing. It's probably pillar number 2.
Where can we find you guys online?
It's like he's trying to wrap up. Is that like, is he giving us the hook?
He wants us out of here.
I feel like you would have known this if you signed up for this. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and wrap up here. So this was the JuggLife podcast. If you guys like it, also you people on the internet like it, go on iTunes, give us a 5-star review, write us something funny or nice. We always appreciate that, and it helps more people find the show. Subscribe to our YouTube, where our man Shorty here, the world's strongest videographer, 500-pound deadlift by Mr. Shorty right here. By far the hardest working juggernaut. By far the hardest working juggernaut, because he had to be here the whole time that Max and I did, plus now he actually has to edit this stuff.
Yeah.
3+ videos a week there, and we're getting to the point really with the YouTube that if you've got a question, we've got an answer about it on there. We offer online coaching for powerlifting, weightlifting, super total, which is powerlifting and weightlifting together, strongman and power building, which is powerlifting and bodybuilding together, through juggernautcoaching.com. You know, all the regular stuff at jtsstrength.com. And then, yeah, Max, where can they follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram, Max_Ada, on Facebook, MaxAda, or you can email me, max@jtsstrength.com.
And I'm Chad Wesley Smith, at Chad Wesley Smith, and at Juggernaut Training on Facebook and Instagram. Big, big thank you to D-Town CrossFit and this great group of people in Dallas, Texas. This was the JuggLife, and we'll see you next week.